This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi Talia.
Hi, Tanya.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Sweet.
I know. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
To another exciting episode.
Thrilling
Episode.
episode.
Today I'm going to tell the story of the White House farm murders.
I saw something on this, but I don't remember
All the details?
No, I never remember all the details. I don't even remember all the details of the stories. I do.
I know.
That's what's
I'm
weird.
the same way. I know. Well, there's a lot of details, so I need everyone to perk up.
I'm perked up.
Okay. Before I start, I would like to remind everyone to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Bamber family.
Okay.
Ralph Neville Bamber, he was known as Neville, and his wife June got married in 1949 and moved into White House Farm, which was a farmhouse in Tolleshunt, Darcy, Essex, England.
Oh, okay. This is an English story.
Yes, this is an English story. The property had once belonged to June's father and sat on 300 beautiful acres of farmland. Neville was a farmer, a local magistrate, and a former Royal Air Force pilot, while June was a devout and active member of the church. The couple was very wealthy, religious, and well-known figures within their community. They were unable, though, to have children of their own, so they adopted two children who were unrelated, Jeremy and Sheila. Sheila was the older of the two, and she was 4 years older than Jeremy. Jeremy was born on January 13th, 1961, which coincidentally was Friday the 13th. He was born the son of a vicar's daughter who had an affair with a married Army sergeant, so Jeremy was promptly given up for adoption at just 6 weeks old.
Oh, because it's a shame.
Yeah. Neville and June adopted him, and when Jeremy was old enough, they sent him to Gresham School, which is a boarding school in Norfolk, then college in Colchester. It said that Jeremy always resented his parents for sending him away from home to attend school.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that.
I know. Not as a child, I think.
College was fine.
Yeah. College was great, right? While Neville hoped his son would one day return to the farm to take it over, Jeremy showed no interest whatsoever. He hated the farm and the farming world, and instead drifted through a series of dead-end jobs in his early life. He spent time in Australia and New Zealand before ultimately returning to England to work on his father's farm for about £170 a week. For one, he needed the job to pay for a lavish lifestyle he aspired to have, and secondly, he was painfully aware that he would have been cut out of the will if he didn't stay working on the farm. You know, they're not going to leave it to someone, right?
Anticipating them. He's just really dying and he really wants the farm.
Well, he didn't want to be cut out of the money from the farm, right? I mean, it's probably worth a lot. The Bambers also ran a very successful caravan site, which is like campers.
Okay. RVs.
But wouldn't let Jeremy work there as they felt he had no business sense. It said that Jeremy was overly confident, egotistical, flamboyant, and cocky, and he used his affluent background in order to impress women with this fake facade of being a playboy.
Oh, okay, because he comes from a big farm?
Yeah, and they have money.
No, yeah.
He was also said to have a lot of ties to drugs, and he loved to party.
Well, I can't fault him for that.
Know, right. Neville owned a cottage at 9 Head Street in Goldhanger, just about 3 miles from the farmhouse, and he let Jeremy live in that completely rent-free.
Well, that's nice.
Right. 4 years before Jeremy was born, Sheila was born, July 18th, 1957, and she was born to the 18-year-old chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and she was placed for adoption when she was 2 weeks old.
What?
I know, and June and Neville adopted her. Like Jeremy, she was also sent away to school. She attended Secretarial College before she began living one of her dreams and working in London as a model, so apparently she was very pretty. During her days of modeling, she inherited the nickname Bambi.
Because of her last name.
Right.
Right?
Probably, yeah. I would think so, right? Bambi. Yeah. While she was in London, Neville and June paid for the apartment she stayed in. And when she was only 20, Sheila married her longtime boyfriend, Colin Caffel, in May of 1977. Just 2 years after tying the knot, she gave birth to twin boys, Nicholas and Daniel. Sheila struggled with her mental health, and she was doing this while trying to juggle a family of her own, and that placed a great deal of stress on her marriage with Colin.
Did she have depression or?
Well, I'll get into it a little bit later.
Okay.
As a result, 3 years after the boys were born, the couple divorced in May 1982. Mental illness was nothing new to the Bamber family. June suffered from extreme depression, and June's the mom, and she had been in and out of her fair share of psychiatric facilities since the 1950s.
Oh.
And I should note that June underwent electroshock therapy at least 6 different times throughout her life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and if you don't know, for who doesn't know, electroshock therapy consists of hooking the head up to a machine that sends 70 to 100 volts of electricity directly through the brain. And the time frame, like each shock, lasts between 100 milliseconds and 6 seconds.
Damn.
6 seconds probably feels like an eternity, right?
I'm sure they give them a sedative.
Oh, I hope
Something.
so.
Knock
I hope
them out.
so.
I don't know.
I hope so. The same year Sheila went through her divorce, June slipped into another bout of depression and she was treated in a psychiatric hospital in 1982. At this point in her life, her interest in religion had become obsessive. She would make Sheila's twins kneel and pray with her each night, which their father Colin wasn't a big fan of. June had hung on all the walls of the farmhouse framed religious texts and always left behind little scribbled notes around the house, which were mainly biblical quotes about personal behavior and beliefs. Grace at mealtime, like saying grace at mealtime, was strictly observed. June took her religious ideals to a frightening level at times. Just like June, Sheila was intensely religious, and this played into her mental health as well. On June 3, 1983, Sheila's general practitioner referred her to Dr. Hugh Ferguson, who was a psychiatrist at St. Andrew's Hospital in Northampton. Dr. Ferguson claimed that Sheila was in an agitated and psychotic state, and he admitted her.
So she's having a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, and he diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder, characterized by disturbance of thinking and perception. Schizoaffective disorder is a mental health disorder that's marked by a combination of schizophrenia symptoms, such as hallucinations or delusions, and mood disorder symptoms, such as depression or mania.
That's not good.
No, poor Sheila. He noted she was overly paranoid and confused by what was real and what was not. He also said she greatly struggled with the concept of good and evil, and even went as far as to believe the devil had taken over her body, and that she had been given the power to project evil onto others, including her sons.
Oh, wow.
She believed she had the power to make her sons do anything she wished, such as have sex.
What?
They're her little boys. I know. Cause violence and kill others around them. I know, it's weird,
I don't
right?
know what to say.
They're like 6. She saw her children as sinners that needed to be cleansed.
Oh, that's not good.
No. Even though Sheila had spoken about suicide, Dr. Ferguson didn't regard her as a suicide risk. As a result, she was discharged on September 10th, 1983, and treated with an antipsychotic drug. But it was her mental problems that kept her away from her children.
Well,
It's probably a good idea at this point because she's struggling. While she and Colin shared joint custody of the twins, the boys mainly stayed with their father at this point. Colin was concerned about Sheila's mental health and how it played a role in her ability to look after the kids.
Yeah, for real.
And at some point, I'm not sure why, the boys had been placed briefly in foster care in 1982 and 83 in Camden, London, near Sheila's home. I'm not sure where Colin was at the time, but anyway. On March 3rd, 1985, Sheila began showing disturbing symptoms once again. She was quickly readmitted to St. Andrews, where she spent almost an entire month, before being discharged on March 29th. From then on, Sheila received monthly injections of an antipsychotic drug that also had a sedative effect. So Jeremy and Sheila, even though they grew up together, they really never got along much.
They're brother and sister and 4 years apart.
Right. Sometimes people would think, what would bring them together, both being adopted, didn't seem to bring them together or closer at all. There had been a time when Jeremy had visited Sheila's London apartment during his college days because he just loved the glitz and the glamour of the capital city. But by the time he got back from his trip in Australia, when he was about 20, Sheila's marriage was falling apart. The twins had been born, and he saw that life was much more difficult for her. And it wasn't all a big party anymore.
Yeah, she's not like modeling in London with this glamorous life.
Right. He tried to understand her behavior, but he confessed to being defeated by her erratic moods, bizarre conversations, and what he described as her acute paranoia. A few months after she was released from the month-long hospital stay, on August 4th, 1985, and at this point Sheila's like 28 and Jeremy's 24, Sheila had come with her boys to spend a week at her parents' farmhouse, the White House Farm. The farm's housekeeper said she saw Sheila on August 5th and noticed nothing unusual. Additionally, Sheila was also seen on August 6th with her children by two farm workers, Julie and Leonard, who said she seemed happy. On the evening of August 6th, Sheila and Jeremy joined their parents at the dinner table where they shared a meal as a family. After dinner, the twins were put to bed, and the family started having a conversation and discussing the possibility of putting the twins into foster care. And I'm not sure why, like, where's Colin, but it was due to Sheila's mental health issues. This was supposed to be merely a temporary solution until she got things back under control.
Why couldn't her parents watch them?
I don't know. And this conversation turned into a heated argument, and Jeremy left the farmhouse that night sometime after 9:30. Barbara Wilson, who's the farm's secretary, telephoned the farmhouse at around 9:30 that evening, and she spoke to Neville. She said he was short with her, which was unlike him, and Barbara was left with the impression that she had interrupted an argument. June's sister, Pamela, also telephoned the house that evening at about 10. She said she talked to Sheila, who she thought was rather quiet over the phone, and then she talked to her sister June, who seemed normal. Aside from speculation surrounding these two calls made to the Bamber residence that evening, Jeremy's account of what happened that night and the next day are all the police really had to go on. So the next morning at around 3 a.m., Jeremy received a call, an emergency call, from his father, Neville. What's odd is that Jeremy didn't call 999, which is England's 911, but instead he called a local police department at 3:26 a.m. And he said, "I'm Jeremy Bamber of 9 Head Street, Goldhanger. You've got to help me." End quote. He stated that he received a frantic phone call from his father, who lived at White House Farm, and he pleaded with them to come over and help him. He said his father told him, quote, "Your sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun," end quote. Then the line went dead. Jeremy went on to give information about his sister Sheila. He told police she had a history of psychiatric treatment and that she'd been depressed in the past. He said something along the lines of, she could go mad at anything and she's done it before. When asked if there were guns in the house, Jeremy stated, "Yeah, there's a lot of guns in the house." When asked if he tried to call his father back, Jeremy said he had, but there was no answer at the farmhouse. The officer on the line advised him he had had contact with Witham police and that a patrol car was on its way to the farm. The officer asked Jeremy to meet the officers at the farmhouse.
Jeremy didn't go to the farmhouse?
He was making these calls from his cottage, which is about 3 miles away. He said, I got this call from my dad, and he's talking to the police, so they're like, okay, cops are on their way, go meet them. As everyone was racing there, someone noticed a silver Vauxhall Astra.
What the hell is that?
Which is a car, traveling at a rather slow speed of 30 miles an hour, and they noticed the driver was a young man in his mid-20s. Obviously, the police car overtook this vehicle at a high speed, and a few moments later, they were pulling into the driveway of White House Farm. Police waited around for a few minutes before that same car they had previously passed pulled in behind them and parked. The officers were surprised to see Jeremy get out, especially since anyone else in that same situation you would think would have been barreling down the road at frightening speeds in an effort to get to their family who was in distress.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It seems kind of odd. The police get out of their vehicles and they began asking Jeremy about his account of what had been happening. Jeremy told them about the scared phone call from his father, that Sheila had been wielding a gun and going off the deep end, and informed them that there were 5 people inside. There was Sheila, his mother and father, and the twins. He told them there's a shit ton of guns inside. There were shotguns and .22 caliber rifles. When they asked him if he thought that it was likely that Sheila would be in the house with a gun, Jeremy answered matter-of-factly, "Oh, yes." One of the officers asked, "Who's she more likely to be annoyed at seeing, you or us?" Jeremy replied, "Both of us. I don't get on with her at all. I don't like her, and she doesn't like me." In this moment, Jeremy seemed...
Well, they're just going to send Jeremy in?
Well,
was that what their goal was?
I don't think they were going to send him in. I think they wanted to maybe have him come and maybe point out like where the rooms are. I don't know. But Jeremy seemed really calm for being in this situation, which made the officers grow somewhat suspicious. Also, his casual talk of his family was concerning to them. I guess he wasn't super upset. I don't know how people handle things, though.
I would be freaking out.
I would be freaking out. I probably wouldn't be able to talk all that coherently.
Or I'd just be screaming or something crazy.
At any rate, police decided it would be a good idea for Jeremy to approach the house with them, seeing that he's family. As they advanced on the house, they asked Jeremy if he thought Sheila was likely to go berserk with a gun. Jeremy responded by saying, quote, "I don't really know. She's a nutter. She's been having treatment," end quote.
She's a nutter?
She's a nutter. They asked, "Why would your father have called you before calling the police if there was trouble?"
That's a really good point.
Right? And Jeremy said, "Well, my dad wasn't one to get organizations involved. He said his father preferred to keep family matters under wraps, and Sheila's recent treatment was something he wanted to keep secret in order to spare the family name and reputation."
I don't know.
If I'm in danger...
and if they're going to put their grandkids in foster care, I mean, that seems like that might ruin their reputation a little bit.
You would think. I don't know. They didn't ask why he didn't call 999 before trying 2 police stations, and Jeremy acted dumb, claiming he didn't know how their system worked.
What?
Come on now.
What the fuck?
He's 24 years old. We all know how emergency services work.
Stupid.
At this point, Jeremy and the couple of police officers walking alongside him had made it to the farmyard on the side of the house, taking cover behind a wall next to the main barn. It was from this point that they had a clear view of one side of the dark, quiet house. They were taking note of the lights that were still turned on inside the house when suddenly they heard a faint whimper of a dog coming from inside. That's when an officer turned to Jeremy, and Jeremy thought out loud, like, how odd it was the way the dog was making noise, and yet his father wasn't responding to the dog to see why the dog was making these sounds, like, calling out to the dog, like, "What's wrong? What's wrong, girl?" Stuff you would say. They noted that the doors and all of the windows appeared to be closed. Aside from the strangely muffled sound of the distressed dog, the house was otherwise silent. Jeremy pointed out his parents' bedroom window, as well as Sheila's. So the police and Jeremy are crouched there. They were completely still, and they just watched and listened when they saw what appeared to be a movement or shadow in one of the windows. After a couple minutes passed, the officers chalked up what they thought they saw to be a momentary reflection in the glass. However, they couldn't be sure of this, and they weren't about to take a chance, so they quietly withdrew from their current position and quickly ran back down the driveway to where the other police officers were waiting, in case someone was going to start shooting at them.
Right.
When they were safe, the officers began questioning Jeremy about what he meant when he made comments earlier alluding to Sheila being a nutter. Jeremy said, "She's a depressive psychopath.
Oh.
She's been having psychiatric treatment. She only came out of the hospital about 6 weeks ago." When they asked if Sheila could use a gun, I mean, they've been asking him this like 4,000 times. He said, "Yes, she used to come target shooting with me. She's used all the guns in the house before." Then he added, "Something's wrong. The dog doesn't usually make that kind of noise. It's more of a whine than a bark. Something's wrong." With this information, police were now persuaded that Sheila had indeed run amok in this isolated farmhouse, brandishing one of the guns and shooting as she saw fit. On the off chance that she was still inside the house, armed and waiting, the police called for expert support from the Essex Police Tactical Firearms Unit. Considering the hour, the police knew it was going to be a little while before the backup arrived, so they enlisted Jeremy's help. This is weird, right? I'm a fucking family member and you're going to want me to help? I don't know.
No.
At the request of the police, Jeremy drew a floor plan of the White House farm and its grounds, both the upper and lower floors, showing positions of doorways, any hiding spots, and who occupied what room. He also wrote a list of people he assumed to be in the house, which, as I told you, Mom, Dad, Sheila, her 6-year-old twins, and the dog. He made a list of the many weapons police could expect to find in the house, because there were many rifles. When they asked Jeremy if any of the weapons he listed could be loaded, Jeremy said that they were all probably loaded.
Oh.
And that he was certain the automatic .22 rifle was loaded because he had loaded it himself the previous night.
Why?
Jeremy said, he left the dinner table that night, and before he made it to his car, he caught sight of a rabbit in their yard. By the time he got up to load the gun and locate the rabbit, it was gone, and he just left the gun loaded.
You're going to go shoot the rabbit?
Apparently. He never ended up using it, and instead left it propped up against a wooden bench in the vestibule off the kitchen, and he left, and it was about 10:15. He also recalled he left behind a full magazine clip and a box of ammunition lying on top of a blanket right next to the gun.
Okay.
I know. Why would you leave it out?
Why?
With kids running around.
All right, and you're saying that your sister is a psychotic nutter.
All right. At 5 a.m., an armed squad of officers from the Tactical Firearms Unit arrived at the White House farm. Jeremy talked to the officer in charge, Sergeant Douglas Adams, about everything he knew that could possibly help them, as well as the location of the loaded rifle he had left in the kitchen the night before. Adams then led Jeremy back to the farmyard, where he asked him to point out various windows. With each bit of info he relayed, Adams deployed his men into various positions. Jeremy was then informed that the team was surrounding the house and ready to storm on command. At 7:25 a.m., after having been at the farmhouse for a number of hours, yes, members of the Tactical Firearms Unit stormed the building through the kitchen door. They found 5 dead bodies riddled with multiple gunshot wounds. A total of 25 shots had been fired, mostly at close range. They first encountered Neville, who was on the kitchen floor, and he was slumped over a chair which had been knocked over. His head was hovering just above a coal pail, and it was badly beaten and battered.
So he wasn't just shot, he was beaten.
Yeah, and his blue pajama top was heavily blood-stained. Blood had started to puddle from the wounds into a deep red pool on the floor, and somehow his pants ended up around his knees.
What?
Weird. More small blood spots were splattered across the floor at the other end of the kitchen, where the telephone was left off the hook. Several .22 caliber shells lay beside it. Neville had been shot 8 times, 6 times to the head and face.
Oh.
Right? Which were fired with the rifle a few inches from his skin. The remaining 2 shots were to his body, and they occurred from at least 2 feet away. Based on where the empty cartridges were found, 3 were in the kitchen and 1 on the stairs, the police believe Neville had been shot 4 times upstairs before managing to get away and escaping to the kitchen on the main floor. It was there where his attacker followed him and a heightened struggle took place, during which he was hit several times with the rifle and shot again, this time fatally. There were 2 wounds to his right side and 2 to the top of his head, which would have most likely have resulted in unconsciousness.
Wait, who is this?
Neville.
I thought he had 6 to the head.
I think 2 were at the top of his head. The left side of his lip was wounded, his jaw was fractured, and his teeth, neck, and larynx were damaged. The pathologist said he would have had difficulty talking, which puts into question Jeremy's claim that his father called him.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There were gunshot wounds to his left shoulder and left elbow. He also had black eyes, a broken nose, bruising to the cheeks, cuts on the head, bruising to the right forearm, and circular burn-type marks on his back.
What?
Which were consistent with his having been hit with the rifle. He had the shit beat out of him. And his wounds matched the scene of the crime. It looked as though Neville had been in what looked like a fight to the death by the appearance of the kitchen. The floor was littered with broken plates, dishes, furniture pieces, crumbled farm magazines, sugar, and much more. A ceiling light lampshade had been broken as well, and blood was just splattered all over the place. Next, the police made it up the stairs to the 2nd floor. They found both Daniel and Nicholas, Sheila's twins, in their beds, both shot in the head.
That's just horrible.
I know.
Unbelievable.
Daniel had been shot 5 times.
What?
Right? It's crazy. 4 times with the gun held within 1 foot of his head, and once from more than 2 feet away. Nicholas had been shot 3 times, all contact or close proximity shots. Sadly enough, one of the boys was found with his thumb still in his mouth as if he was sucking on it.
Oh, man.
I know. In the master bedroom, June was found on her back and slightly on her side, her head resting against the open door. The nightdress she had been wearing was heavily blood-stained. She had been shot 7 times, including once directly between her eyes and another in the side of her head, which would have brought on a quick death. There were also shots to the right side of her lower neck, her right forearm, and 2 injuries on the right side of her chest and her right knee. The police believe she had been sitting up during part of the attack based on the pattern of blood on her clothing. 5 of the shots occurred when the gun was at least a foot from her body. The shot between her eyes was from less than 1 foot. They heard the faint sound of scratching and looked under the bed only to find the dog's hiding spot. That's where the poor thing was.
Oh.
Moving further into the room, police discovered the body of Sheila, which lay beside June's bed. Also on her back, Sheila was wearing a blood-stained nightdress with 2 bullet holes in her throat, just below her chin. She was found with a .22 rifle laying on top of her body and pointing at her chin, propped up with her right hand lying loosely near the trigger. At first glance, anyone would assume this was a clear murder-suicide.
Right.
The gun was propped in such a way to give the illusion Sheila had done it herself. An open Bible lay next to her on the floor, face down, almost as if it was making some kind of statement or leaving behind a message. The postmortem examination showed that she could have survived for a few minutes after sustaining the first wound, but would have died immediately upon sustaining the second. It was also noted that the bloodstains on her nightdress suggested she was sitting up when she received both injuries. Since Sheila had a history of threatening to take her own life, as well as her children's, along with her need to cleanse her mother of evil and her kids and everybody else, it was therefore not surprising that the police believed she killed her family before ending her own life. The doctor called onto the scene further sealed investigators' thoughts on the crime at hand when he stated that he had no doubt that Sheila had killed her 4 family members and then herself. The original investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector, that's DCI, Thomas Taft Jones, always believed this to be true, as did the coroner. Now it was time for the police to break the news to Jeremy that an unspeakable and horrific tragedy had occurred. When told that his entire family was dead, he didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes and began to cry. He seemed to be in a state of shock. As he continued to sob, one of the officers tried to console Jeremy and offered him a cup of tea. How English. Would you like a cup of tea? I love that. Jeremy immediately asked if there was any whiskey that could be added to it. Someone went to fetch that for him. Detective Stan Jones arrived on the scene and was basically told by DCI Taft that the facts of the case had already been confirmed, legally and medically, that it was clear to all that Sheila had went on a killing spree before ending her own life. Jones was told that all he had to do at this point was to take Jeremy home and get a quick statement for the coroner. Seeing as Jeremy had already been through enough losing his entire family in one night, Jones was instructed not to poke or prod anymore for the investigation. When Jones got into the back seat of the police car next to Jeremy to introduce himself, he found Jeremy sobbing. Just before they were about to leave, one of the officers brought the dog out to the car, and Jones suggested that Jeremy take the Shih Tzu home with him. However, to the detective's surprise, Jeremy insisted that he wouldn't have the animal in his house, damaging all his belongings.
What?
He said, get rid of it.
What the fuck is that?
Have it put down. I hate the fucking thing.
Are you kidding me?
No.
What the fuck?
I know. Really?
Have it put down?
Have it put down. I hate the fucking thing. From that very moment, Jones recalled Jeremy suddenly acting as if nothing had happened. He got a quick glimpse of someone else. For a man who had just lost his entire family, he was suspiciously cool, callous, and completely unconcerned. When they arrived at Jeremy's home, he announced that he was starving and proceeded to cook himself a breakfast of fried bacon, toast, and coffee. Man, I'm hungry.
That's insane.
He devoured the meal while the detectives sipped their coffee and waited for Jeremy to finish eating so they could finally get his statement. And before I tell you more, we're going to take a break. While the detectives were still with Jeremy, his cousin Ann Eaton had phoned to say she was on her way. When she arrived, Jeremy was still in the middle of giving his statement. Anne sat with Jeremy while he talked, holding one of his hands. Not long after Anne had gotten to the cottage, Jeremy's 19-year-old college student girlfriend arrived. Her name was Julie. She sat next to Jeremy on the opposite side, consoling him and holding his other hand. Anne noted that Jeremy and Julie kept escaping upstairs as if they wanted to be alone to comfort each other. A little later, Anne's brother David also joined them at Jeremy's cottage. The detectives listened as the cousins tried to piece together what had happened. They were adamant in their thought that this wasn't at all like Sheila. Anne also listened intently but couldn't help but feel skeptical of the situation. She thought of Sheila, the mentally unstable woman with no knowledge of guns, and she simply couldn't picture Sheila doing something like this as a whole. Even Anne's brother agreed that he thought Jeremy had been putting on an act. Anne began keeping a record of Jeremy's story and noticing the sequence of events he provided to police. Almost immediately, she began to question many things. For one, how did Sheila know how to load and reload the .22 rifle if she hadn't done it before? Originally, Jeremy had told the police officers that Sheila was skilled with a gun.
Yeah.
And yet, her family begged to differ. Now he was stating that he didn't know if she was good with a gun and that he just couldn't remember.
He said that they went and did target practice.
Yeah, target practice. And her family's like, no. And that was just one of the many inconsistencies in Jeremy's story. While Anne volunteered her thoughts to the detectives, who had already begun formulating their own opinion of Jeremy and what happened that fateful night, Detective Jones had a huge dilemma. While he was more than inclined to believe that Jeremy might have been the killer, he was under strict instructions to assume Sheila's guilt and to persuade ex-husband Colin to accept the official police view. He had to convince Colin that it was 4 murders and a suicide.
Why?
Because that's what his higher-ups were telling him.
Why did he have to convince Colin?
I don't know. He just said that's what happened. Maybe to just put an end to the questioning. To make matters worse, a major cleanup took place on the farmhouse within the first 24 to 48 hours after the murders. Carpets and rugs that were heavily blood-stained had been removed from the house and burned on the grounds before any real forensic evidence could be taken from them.
Who ordered that?
Jeremy.
Okay.
Yes. The crime scene wasn't as secure as it normally would have been because police were so convinced Sheila was the murderer. The next day, Anne visited Jeremy again and found it quite odd that he had drove around town and picked up a plethora of newspapers emblazoned with front-page headlines about their family tragedy. When Detective Jones showed up later that same day to ask who was going to identify the bodies, Julie almost immediately volunteered, saying she would do it. Almost in the same breath, Jeremy announced he would be out for the day visiting his lawyer, his accountant, and his bank manager.
Really? Are
Right.
you fucking kidding me?
No. This was odd to everyone who heard it, but Jeremy explained that his family's finances required urgent attention.
Really?
Right, like really?
Oh,
It can't wait?
He's an asshole.
Mhm.
He's so stupid.
When the detectives left, Anne questioned Jeremy about how he told police that Sheila was a drug addict. Jeremy made it seem like he was sorry to have been the bearer of bad news, but it was true. Anne then said she never noticed any track marks on Sheila's arms. Jeremy smiled at her, almost like a creepy sneer, and said, quote, "There are much more sophisticated ways of doing it these days. Anyway, they'll soon be able to tell if she was on drugs when they cut into the body's fatty tissue and have it analyzed." End quote.
The hell?
I know. It was careless remarks like this that further led Jeremy's cousin to believe he wasn't telling the truth and had something to hide. Who would talk about their recently deceased sister like this?
Right.
Really? On August 10th, Jeremy's cousins searched the farmhouse once more in hopes of finding anything that investigators may have missed the first time around. As luck would have it, they came across the silencer that was supposed to have been attached to the murder weapon in the gun cupboard.
A silencer. I was
Mhm.
wondering how come they're in bed and all that when there's gunshots.
Right? And from a
being
rifle,
fired.
too.
Yeah.
Additionally, they noticed the silencer had what appeared to be flakes of dried blood on its surface. They turned this evidence over to the police, who sent it to forensic pathology.
The family found this.
9 days after the shooting, the bodies were returned, and Jeremy was able to lay his family to rest. During the funeral, countless pictures were taken of a devastated and dramatic grieving Jeremy. His girlfriend Julie was seen right by his side at all times. At one point, he slipped up when he admitted that his main concern was the camera catching his best profile.
What?
Really?
The fuck is that?
I know. From the images, Jeremy was putting on the perfect show for anyone watching. The press also commented that Jeremy's behavior during the funeral seemed to come off as insincere and overboard. Even his own family members questioned his behavior. After the funeral ended, Jeremy went out to eat and celebrate with friends. He paid no mind to what this might make him look like. With the money he received from his parents' death, Jeremy continued to lead a life of luxury and really began spending a lot of money. He didn't seem to be grieving at all, more like I said, celebrating. He didn't come across as grief-stricken in the slightest. He often went out and about with his friends, spent money as if he would never run out. He flew to Amsterdam on a whim and really lived the life of luxury he had always dreamed of. However, greed got the best of him, that and his awfulness as a human being. As if he didn't have enough money already, Jeremy reached out. This is a really scummy thing to do, by the way. Jeremy reached out to a couple of local newspapers in an attempt to sell some of Sheila's soft porn pictures from her modeling days.
Oh my God. That is so... Oh my God. And I'm so angry.
Right? After being denied by the first publication, Jeremy talked to a crime reporter at The Sun. When discussing the content of the photos, Jeremy said there was one of her with a vibrator and another where she was using a cucumber. He was hoping to get £100,000. The reporter discussed the offer with his editor, and they decided, which is awesome, to not only turn down his offer, but also expose him for the piece of shit he was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you believe that?
No.
The next day, the Sun ran a flashy headline above the crease on the fold of the paper on their front page, calling Jeremy out in front of the world for trying to sell pornographic pictures of his recently deceased sister.
What a dick.
They're just disgusted by his behavior. He talked about his sister as if she was nothing more than some inanimate object. More than a month later, the silencer was examined. This time, a scientist found a speck of blood inside the silencer that matched Sheila's, which proved she had been shot while the silencer was still on the rifle. This opened up a whole can of worms and flipped the investigation upside down. Aside from raising questions around who placed the silencer back in the cupboard after it had been used, this evidence proved that it was impossible for Sheila to have killed herself. With the silencer attached to the gun,
It would have been too long.
yeah, it was too long for Sheila to have been able to pull the trigger on her own. DCI Taft was immediately removed from the case. Not sure why. Oddly enough, he died by falling off his ladder at home before the case made it to trial. Caught up in living behind his means, Jeremy started to act carelessly with regard to Julie, his girlfriend. On September 3rd, she discovered that Jeremy had asked out another woman. Furious, she confronted him, which caused them to get into a huge fight. She admitted that she tried to smother Jeremy with a pillow, stating, quote,
Whoa.
"If you're dead, then you'll always be with me," end quote. It's also said that she chucked an ornament box across the room and slapped him. The fight ended with the couple breaking up. 4 days later, on September 7th, Julie came forward and began talking to the police about Jeremy being the one behind the murders.
Oh, shit.
I know.
Scorned woman.
Right? She claimed that Jeremy had been planning to kill his family for a very long time, and once it was done, he was set to inherit about £435,000, along with 300 acres of land. Julie said that Jeremy called her on the night of the murders, stating, quote, "It's tonight or never," end quote. He told her he hired a hitman named Matthew McDonald for £2,000, although this man ended up providing a solid alibi. Police believe Jeremy was just simply putting one on for her and that he'd been the one to do the killing. She said she could prove Jeremy was dishonest because she was with him when they burgled the family-owned caravan site 5 months earlier. She said he justified taking the lives of his family members by stating his father was old. He was only 61, by the way.
What?
His mom and sister were both crazy, and that the twins would be better off without a crazy mother. With Julie's statement and the evidence found at the farmhouse, the police finally had enough to bring Jeremy in. On September 29th, Jeremy was arrested and charged for the 5 murders. On October 14th, 1986, Jeremy was tried before the High Court judge, Mr. Justice Drake, Sir Maurice Drake, and a jury at Chelmsford Crown House in a case that lasted 19 days. Jeremy's ex-girlfriend was the star witness. Julie told the court all about Jeremy's plans for the murders and how he acted after the fact, which painted him in an extremely negative light. She alleged that Jeremy had made murderous threats against his father and made a reference that his old father, mad mother, and sister had nothing to live for.
Oh, okay.
Right? Receiving the family inheritance was motive alone. She said he blatantly showed no remorse for what he had done.
That's clear.
The evidence that was presented regarding Sheila was that Sheila would have had to fire a semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle perfectly 25 times, hitting each target to kill her whole family. Like there were no errant bullets. Not to mention, she had to reload at least 2 times. If that was the case, the police believed her fingernails would have been broken or at least chipped, but they were perfectly manicured when her body was found. The majority of her family claimed she never even held a gun before, despite Jeremy's claims. Additionally, she would have had to overpower her 6'4" father, creating the mess seen in the kitchen, and yet she had no bruises or markings on her body that would indicate she'd been in any kind of physical altercation. There were no traces of gunpowder or lead dust, which is usually the case when handling .22 caliber ammunition. On her nightdress, the blood was consistent with her own, with no trace of firearm discharge residue on it. Her urine indicated she had taken cannabis some days before and the antipsychotic drug haloperidol, which she was prescribed, but there was no other drugs. Dr. Ferguson said that the kind of violence displayed the night of the murders was not consistent with his view of Sheila, though he said she had expressed disturbing thoughts toward her mother. June's sister Pamela testified that Sheila was not a violent person, and she claimed she had never known Sheila to use a gun. That cousin Ann said Sheila wouldn't know one end of the barrel of a gun to another. Sheila's ex-husband said that while Sheila had been prone to outbursts that involved throwing pots and pans and she occasionally hit him, he had no knowledge whatsoever of her ever harming the children. Despite mounting evidence, Jeremy remained confident that he would leave court a free man. This cocky attitude of his was made apparent in court as well. While on the stand, the prosecution accused him of lying, and in response, Jeremy said, quote, "That is what you have got to establish," end quote.
Oh, wow.
Sassy.
Wow.
Right? Sorry, it's not my burden, it's yours. Cocky or not, on October 18th, 1986, 10 of the 12 jurors returned a guilty verdict, which I guess is enough to convict someone.
Good.
The judge deemed him, quote, evil, almost beyond belief, end quote, and handed him 5 life terms with a recommendation that he serve at least 25 years in prison without parole. After the sentence, Mr. Justice Drake said, quote, "I find it difficult to foresee whether it will ever be safe to release someone who can shoot 2 little boys as they lie asleep in their beds."
His nephews.
Yes, end quote. He also noted the problems that had taken place during the initial detective work and throughout the beginning stages of the main police investigation. He noted the first error, which was the police allowing the house to be cleared shortly after the killings. The house itself had been cleaned and the carpets and bedclothes burned on Jeremy's instructions, which the judge was just fucking floored by that. Next, while Jeremy's fingerprints were eventually discovered on the Bible and the gun left on Sheila's body, these 2 crucial pieces of evidence were missed during the initial investigation. It was also revealed that while Jeremy had claimed he received an emergency phone call from his father that night, Neville had actually been shot in the throat, which would have prevented him from making such a call. The judge told Jeremy that he was, quote, warped and evil, end quote, and added that he found it difficult to imagine anyone agreeing to release Jeremy from jail in the future. Since his conviction, he has been told by each home security, and they're responsible for all national security, policing, and immigration policies in the UK, that he will never gain his freedom through parole. That being said, Jeremy has never faltered or wavered in his firm stance of innocence.
Oh, he can shut the fuck up.
Even after being denied his first 2 appeals in 1989 and 1994. Not that he has it all bad, though. In 2001, Jeremy spoke about the living conditions of the prison facilities he attended. And it was obvious he was meaning to be braggy. He said he'd gone through 17 jail moves and 89 cell moves since he was first arrested. For the most part, he has been treated with a certain degree of indulgence, and he's not quiet about it.
Okay.
At one of the prisons in the UK that he was at, Jeremy was said to have been given the key to his cell, studied for his GCSE, General Certification of Secondary Education, in Sociology and Media Studies, has a daily badminton lesson, and drew pictures of supermodels in art class.
Oh, that's great.
That he was able to sell.
Oh, he's living the life.
He is. In addition, he's managed to receive compensation twice while serving time. Once after suffering whiplash injuries when a van moving him between prisons crashed, and another time when a Game Boy was stolen from his cell. What the fuck? I didn't think they were allowed to have electronics.
I don't know. It's England.
Romantically, Jeremy claims to have 3 relationships with women inside, one which is a trainee policewoman, and that he receives 50 letters a week from women.
No, that's great.
Right. So here's a summarized rundown of what Jeremy and his legal team have been up to since 2001. In July 2001, a team of police officers were given 4 months to complete fresh inquiries into Jeremy's case. It was referred back to the Court of Appeals by the Criminal Case Review Commission, the CCRC, which investigates possible miscarriages of justice. It reminded me, their organization is a government agency, but it reminded me a little bit like the Innocence Project. Here, as a prisoner alleging a miscarriage of justice, Jeremy is allowed access to the media and once called a radio station from Whitmore Jail to protest his innocence. In 2002, Jeremy upset and angered his relatives when he offered a £1 million reward for any information that could help overturn his conviction. In December 2002, he lost his appeal again against his conviction and also lost a high court case regarding a claim for £1.27 million from his grandmother's will that he thought he was entitled to. In 2004, Jeremy was attacked by a fellow prisoner with a knife while talking on the phone, and he needed 20 stitches for cuts to his neck. Somebody knifed him. Also in 2004, Jeremy hired a new defense team and wrote to the CCRC, asking them to look at the case again, based in part on photographs of the crime scene that had been made available during the trial but were not in the bundle of photographs shown to the jury. In 2007, his defense team also arranged for Jeremy to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed.
No, I don't care.
I know. The CCRC rejected the 2004 request, but the defense team made a fresh submission in 2009, and the CCRC rejected that as well. In May 2008, Jeremy lost a high court appeal against the whole life tariff, which assures that he will remain in prison for the rest of his life. And in May 2009, the appeals court upheld the decision.
Good.
Jeremy is now one of 38 prisoners in the UK to have been told they will never be released with that whole life tariff. He's also the only one out of the 38 that persists his innocence.
Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
In August 2010, the Daily Mirror reported that the defense team had located a police telephone log that had been entered as evidence during the trial, but had not been noticed by Jeremy's lawyers or included as part of the jury bundle. It showed that someone calling himself Mr. Bamber had telephoned police at 3:26 a.m. on the night of the attack to say his daughter had one of his guns and was going berserk.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know about that.
I don't know.
There are some interesting takes on the investigation, and they're almost creepy to point out. For example, there's a theory that photos of Sheila's dead body, which had only recently been passed to the defense, showed 2 bullet holes under her chin and blood leaking from both sides of her mouth and cheeks. At the time this photo was taken, her blood wasn't dried up, but instead fresh and still wet, which indicated that she died sometime after 3:30 a.m. If this is true, she was alive while Jeremy was outside with the police.
I'm not buying it. I'm just not.
The location of Sheila's body was also disputed. There were 4 different accounts logged that all contradicted each other. The one I find most interesting, though, is P.C. Collins' report just before the door was busted down, that he reported seeing through a window what he thought was the body of a woman just inside the kitchen door. Might I add, his account wasn't the only one that included the body of a female seen on the first floor. The defense believed that these officers did in fact see Sheila, but that she wasn't dead just yet and was able to regroup, get up, and flee back upstairs before they could storm the farmhouse.
Okay. And then what'd she do with the silencer?
Right. How'd she get it back in the cupboard, right?
Scene.
There's another recorded log of a police officer that heard a sound coming from upstairs as soon as he entered the farmhouse. Assuming it was Sheila, the officer shouted back but received no response in return. Another intriguing piece of evidence found by Jeremy's lawyers was Exhibit 29, which was a one-page list of radio messages from the scene. Compared to police witness statements, it was suggested that key radio messages from police had been left out when the lawyers requested the original document so that it could be sent for analysis. The police refused. However, in an interesting turn of events, the defense was accidentally sent multiple pages from a telephone log made at the time, which they hadn't originally asked for. At 5:25 a.m., the day where everyone was at the farmhouse, the police officers who met Jeremy there and spent time with him outside the house, they were in a car with the call signal Charlie Alpha 7 and relayed a message from the tactical firearms team. And the team said they were in conversation with someone inside the farmhouse. So who were they talking to?
I don't know. I'm not buying any of this.
Another log was recorded just a few minutes later from CA7 and read, "Challenge to persons inside house met with no response." Another theory surrounds the sighting of what was believed to be a male at 3:45 a.m. It introduces the possibility that someone other than Sheila or Jeremy carried out this terrible crime.
That's not happening. That's not it.
I know, right? Whether it was Sheila or some other unknown individual who was seen moving within the building, this may be something we never find out the truth about. As we stand today in 2022, it would be beyond helpful to learn more about the evidence we do have, matched against the advanced scientific techniques we utilize today. But alas, this is impossible because Essex police destroyed many of the original trial exhibits, including all the blood-based samples, in February 1996. Those responsible swore up and down that they didn't realize the exhibits might be needed again later on down the road. So this is why this case was one of the first to be transferred to the new CCRC, which said that the destruction of scientific exhibits was in breach of their guidelines. There's just so many unsolved mysteries and questions within this story. So many holes.
Yeah, but I still think he did it.
Yeah, I do too. I believe that as long as Jeremy is alive and well, he will continue to fight to the bitter end in a desperate attempt to one day maybe be able to regain a piece of his freedom. As Neville Bamber would always say, quote, "Maybe the truth will still come out in the wash." And that is my story about the White House farm murders.
That's a crazy story.
I know.
I think he did it, though.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just floored by the silencer.
Yeah.
Like, that just
How do you explain
sticks.
that?
Right, how do you explain that?
You don't.
Because it had Sheila's blood in it.
Yeah.
So she had to have been shot facing it.
Yes.
And she couldn't shoot herself. Why would she shoot herself, go put the silencer back, and then shoot herself again with no silencer? Right?
That's what I'm saying. That's why it doesn't make any sense.
No. That piece of evidence is the one that I question. Well, Talia, before we go.
That's quite a story, Tanya.
Thank you. We have some shout-outs.
Sweet.
And the shout-outs are people who have either a Patreon subscription or Apple subscription. What that means is they get extra episodes that are not released to the public. We release one a week, same as we release our free episodes. And there are minis that we release twice a month. So we would like to thank Stacy K.
Thank you.
Stolen Lives, Teresa T., Karen B., Kimmy, Giovanni O., Emily M., Alejandra P., Elena B., Wendy L., Carrie G., Beverly Z., Charity S., and Sarah E.
Thank you guys so much. Ooh.
And if you're interested in finding out what that's all about, go to patreon.com/TNTcrimes and you can learn how to sign up there, or you can sign up through your Apple app if you're listening on your iPhone. There's a button you click. It's real easy. And the same episodes are on Patreon that are on Apple.
Yeah, and you can go to our website, crimesandconsequences.com, and click on some buttons there, too.
Right. You can subscribe there, too. And if you'd like to see photos from this episode, you can go to our website that Talia just mentioned.
Yep.
And you can also find us on social media at Hardcore True Crime on Facebook and Instagram. And I think that's probably it.
That's it. That was great, though.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you.
And until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.